A dedicated student of Kundalini Yoga for over 3 decades, his journey includes a significant 20-year sojourn in India for an immersive exploration of yoga and meditation, before recently settling in Valle de Bravo, Mexico. His expertise not only lies in personal transformation, but also in enabling individuals to embrace freedom while pursuing their passions. Mindful Mutiny is a podcast about people who thoughtfully rebel against the status quo by bravely pursuing their highest potential. Please don't forget to like and subscribe to this podcast. We're growing and we need you. Leave a comment, leave a review. It really helps the whole way through. Today, we have a wonderful guest, and I can't wait to start this conversation. We've got Amrit Singh. Amrit, thank you so much for being on Mindful Mutiny.
Thanks for having me, Jeremy. Super excited to be here.
Can you talk a little bit about what it is that you do?
I love helping people. And so I realized it's really been something I've been doing my whole life. Since I'm a teenager, it was always these conversations and always, like this. It was always a passion for me to help people find their own answers and to process through their blocks, and transformation was always a big part of that too. To kind of shed the old skin and step into a new version of yourself and embrace that uncertainty, embrace that discomfort. And now it's been a passion for me. And so when I started coaching full time, I was like, oh my God, I can do what I love to do every single day. And people pay me money on top of it. So that was a really good solution.
So I'm really interested in what we're talking about here with regard to your work with men. Now, in my background, I had started climbing the corporate ladder. I got all the way to the top. I was the CEO of a company for a couple of years, and I noticed the deterioration of virtually everything social in my life, from my marriage to my friendships and everything like that. It was an all-encompassing position that took everything to do it properly, it felt like. And so you work with men who are dealing with this sort of thing. Can you talk about what men are dealing with, first off?
I think the biggest challenge men have is that it takes them a long time to realize that something is off. Women are much quicker, right? And they start communicating around it. And it's been, with many of the men I talk to, they're telling me, oh yeah, this has been going on for 5, 7, 10 years. And I think, oh my God, that's been your life for the last 10 years and you haven't thought about making a change, addressing that, talking about that. And now that she's talking about getting a divorce, that's suddenly when they're waking up and they're like, no, but this is important to me. You're my family, you're my wife. This is the most important thing in my life. And then we usually come to this point, exactly what you talked about. Okay, if this is the most important thing in your life, how much time and effort do you dedicate every day towards this most important thing in your life? And they come to the point where they're like, not a lot. And that's really the biggest issue here. Because if those men would have just taken 10% of what they've given to their focus in their work and with their job, and invested that into their marriage, into their relationship, into themselves, in opening up and connecting with what's going on inside, they would have never had to face these issues.
Yeah, these things that you're kind of talking about here, what I've noticed in my clinical practice and in my coaching practice is that men feel so disconnected from one another, and that is pretty much the way that it is. I've noticed that Christian groups tend to do a really good job of
Exactly.
holding men together in a ministry, in a men's group or something like that. And there's this mutual support, but secular men who aren't really connected to a spiritual practice or or so forth, or aren't in something like, I don't know, the Sons of the American Legion or the Freemasons, or a fraternal
Mhm.
organization or something like that, there really isn't a strong sense of camaraderie and brotherhood. Sometimes it takes me a year to get two friends together to go out and have a drink.
Yeah. Oh, and exactly what you're saying. For us men, the way to create that camaraderie and get together always involves something else, involves alcohol, involves some sort of distraction. And then very quickly comes to this very superficial point where we're really not going deep at all.
Mm,
So there is really no support. I mean, it's fun. It's fun to go out with your buddies and have a beer, but it's not what we need. Because for us as humans, what we need is this connection with ourselves first. And especially for us men, we're learning when we're teenage boys that we need to be tough and we need to control our emotions and we can't be led by our emotions. So we completely disconnect from that part of ourselves. And that's really helpful if you want to invest 100% of your focus on becoming a great CEO and running a company and making them a lot of money, because you're basically this robot who shows up and performs and never has a bad day. But the problem with that is as time goes on, and this usually happens, in our 40s and our 50s, where we realize, oh my God, looking back on the last 20, 30 years, I've been completely disconnected from myself. And now I'm trying to find connection in my marriage with my wife, but I don't know how to connect because I don't know how to connect with myself.
mm. You know, that connection with yourself, um, I there really feels like there is this avoidance of a spiritual walk among a lot of men, because when we grow up, particularly in Western society, church is a place that is quiet and reverent and boring and repetitive
Yeah.
for an antsy boy who would much rather be playing soccer. And so as you grow in the Western world, a lot of boys just avoid the continuation of going or having spirituality because they equate it with that sort of thing. And it almost feels like spirituality is, I guess, kind of a feminine thing to have, I guess. And so I notice men just generally not engaging that part of themselves and connecting with themselves out of a sense that that's not something for me.
Mhm. 100%. And I think one of the biggest points you brought up here is that spirituality and religion kind of gets thrown into the same,
Yes.
right? And so that when you are a spiritual man, that means you have some sort of religious belief. And so in my journey, I went very deep into the exploration of religion. And in the Sikh religion, as you can tell with the beard and the turban, those are kind of the leftovers from my journey there. And I realized after about 15, 20 years into it, that religion is not for me. I don't want to live a religious life, because with every religion, the biggest issue we have is that we separate ourselves from others. Others that look different, others that pray different, others that connect with source energy in a different way, others which give God a different name than we give God, and they hold a different belief system. So I do see a lot of benefits in a religious practice, but I also see the limitations. And it's very, very man-made. It's not created by women, right? It's a very male thing. When you look at all the big world religions, there's always some male leaders, some male teachings, some male priests for thousands of years. And so this thing with spirituality is really, it's a little bit more like gravity, right? It's something we live with. We are spiritual beings having a human experience rather than human beings trying to have a spiritual experience. So in my belief system, it's, we are all as human beings deeply spiritual. We can choose how much we want to connect with that, how much we want to be in touch with that. But it's a beautiful thing to observe when you look at kids or a lot of women who've done a lot of work on their own spirituality. You can see someone who's connected and in touch with their spirituality being much more grounded, being much more in balance, being much more connected to nature, to the universe as a whole being, rather than just as this half version of, oh, I just, like live my life from my mind.
And as you're working with men on rekindling their relationships, what do you find are, I don't know, maybe the weird narratives that men have built up about themselves and their lives and their purpose and their place in the world that is disconnected from what their, true highest sense of themselves really becomes in work with you?
It's very interesting because when the men start working with me, they want to save their marriage. They want to reconnect with their wives. And then very quickly we get to the point where we're saying, okay, first part is to reconnect with yourself. And so we start diving much deeper into that relationship, which is a deeply spiritual relationship you need to have with yourself first before you can have it with anyone else. And it's a little bit like with love, right? You cannot love other people until you really accept yourself and truly love yourself. And then that love will spread. And so it's the same thing, when if I would lead in my courses with, oh, we work on yourself and it's transformational, 99% of the men would not want to do that kind of work because they're like, oh, no, I don't have time for that kind of stuff. Like you said earlier, right? This is something unmanly. I need to focus on my work. But when it comes down to marriage and to this really important relationship in their life, now they suddenly realize this is so important to me that I'm willing to look at myself. I'm willing to look at what I'm doing, what I can improve. And that has such a huge and profound impact on the marriage. And we see this over and over again that about 6 to 8 weeks, when people have started this process, they suddenly come back and saying, like, my wife is starting to change. I haven't even told her anything about this, but she's nicer to me. We're more affectionate with each other. We feel so much more connected. And I don't even know why, but it's this, when we as men change the way we show up, the world reflects back differently to us. This improves relationships with our children, this improves relationships at work, and most importantly, improves the relationship with our significant other.
Hmm. You said something there, the whole "I don't have the time" thing, and what I find is that there are certain professionals that are so tremendously absorbed with their work that their work is their life.
Yeah.
There's no boundary between their work and their life. However, I find also that there's this other collection of men who have told themselves that they don't have the time, but they've got the time to scroll, they've got the time to drink, they've got the time to, all these other things. They do have the time. They just have somehow managed to tell themselves in the hours of the day that there's not the time for depths of spirit, relaxation, a walk around the block with their wife, or whatever it is. And so do you often have to help people deconstruct the way that they are spending their time?
Yeah. And that's how we start with these very small steps. We really say, like, okay, what can we do which just takes 20, 30 minutes a day, but has a big impact? What would it take to sit down and just spend some quality time with your wife and listen to what she's saying and going through a process and really having a real conversation? And funny enough, what happens then is we very quickly hit the point of, oh yeah, I kind of do have the time, but I'm a little afraid of what will happen when we start going deep, when we start talking
Mm.
about these things which are really important. Maybe I will show some emotions. Maybe I will start crying. And now suddenly they start feeling afraid to create that time and create that openness because they've been so guarded for so many years.
You know, it's that guarded thing. And I've made a practice in my life with my male friends that once in a while I'll just whip out and I love you to a male friend. And it's really interesting because sometimes a male friend will turn around and say, I love you too. But oftentimes there will be this shock and this, what did you say? And there really is an importance in communicating your affection to friends, but men don't do that with other men. And it's really interesting when you actually do put words to a friendship that maybe you had for 30 years. And you say that to a male friend because you really care about them and it communicates something. But men so seldom are willing to be that vulnerable and say something like that, even and what have you found with that difficulty with vulnerability?
That's probably the hardest piece to work on because this is 20, 30, 40 years of conditioning. And so to work on that is scary for most men. And to become vulnerable is a slow process because it really requires a deconstruction of all those walls and protective measures we have put in place since we are 10. And someone told us like, oh, don't cry, don't be, like that,
Yeah,
and be a man and
you
toughen
know,
up. And we created all this weird way of protecting our softness and protecting our heart from pain. And so when it comes to that I would say is the most challenging part for every single person I work
hmm. And what do you see as the most common stress related problems that men deal with? How does the stress of life, and particularly you work with high performers, how does that act out? What are men generally tending to fall into?
usually it starts when the stress levels increase and we're now 20s or 30s, our bodies can kind of handle it, but then comes that age by 40, 50, 60 where it becomes too much, and that's when your body will drop the testosterone levels, right? Because it is not, when you're at that high stress level, it's a natural process that happens. When your testosterone drops, your sex drive drops. You start gaining weight. You start getting sluggish. You are not as motivated to do things. And you feel like the only thing you can do is make it to work and back, and then sit on the sofa and drink your beer and watch TV and not talk to anyone. And that's the biggest problem when it starts affecting the health. And for those men, really all they have to do is, as easy as it sounds, is change their diet and start exercising. But those are the most challenging things to do because they have constructed a lifestyle where the only way they can cope with these high levels of stress is by not exercising and by eating the junk food and stuff, the comfort food, which allows them to just relax. And then that health piece comes. And then the next thing that goes out the window is the sleep. And when your sleep starts getting affected, that's when you start mentally, not being capable of accessing everything that you have in your potential. And that's why sleep deprivation has been used as a torturing device because it is so intense and so heavy for the mind.
You were talking about the lowered testosterone starting in the 40s and 50s. There's a natural thing that happens where it does lower. But I remember being in corporate leadership and other men talking about taking testosterone
Mhm.
because their adrenals were being drained by the work and how beat up you get at that
Mhm.
level in a corporation. And they were taking testosterone pills that they were getting over the counter or being prescribed them. And so it really felt a lot like a ton of self-medicating just to cope with this superhuman level of demand in a career.
Yeah. And that's the thing. I mean, if you want to be addicted to pills for the rest of your life, that's the path to take. But there is another way. And you said something interesting. You said the normal thing for men in their 40s and 50s is for the testosterone levels to drop. That's really just because the norm in our society by the age of 40 and 50 is so stressed, so burned out that their levels drop. So if you take 1,000 men and scan them for their testosterone levels, you will see that 900 of them have reduced levels. But really, the body is able to keep that production up. If you take good care of your health, if you take care of your stress levels, you know, that is very, very doable to have that energy. And then it doesn't come back to, oh, I don't have the time. Then it really comes back to what are my priorities? And when these men are honest, they say, my priority is my work. This is 100% of my priority. And then if I have a little extra time, I spend it with my family, but there's no time in my life for exercise, for healthy eating, for any of those other things. And so the testosterone supplements are the quick fix.
Hmm.
We like quick fixes, right?
Well, heck yeah. And you talked about the male energy and what it brings out of its surroundings. Let's just talk about men and what they are experiencing in their marriages, which is typically having a long time marriage where there is this surprise at a certain point where the wife says, I really need to get out of this. And the man goes, wait, what? I thought we were fine. We just watched Sopranos last night or what have you. And
Exactly.
it's a big surprise. And
Yeah.
so his energy and what he's putting into his craft, his work, or what have you, what are the things that you commonly hear are the feminine response to that energy going in the direction of the career, that neglect, or whatever you would call it?
I think one of the challenges for women is to understand that we as men are very good at doing one thing at a time, right? Where we can just shut out the whole world, we can focus on our computer, we can sit there for 8 hours. For women, they can get their work done, but then at the same time, they take care of the kids, they organize the shopping, they make sure a million things are done, and they still do their work, right? That's because the woman has this ability to multitask. For us men, especially when we get very good at something, suddenly everything else drops away. And so it needs to be this very conscious effort to, hey, you want to get good at being in a relationship? Do you want to get good at communicating and creating emotional closeness so that this woman who you tell me is the love of your life and the most important thing in your entire life feels honored and respected and has her needs fulfilled in this relationship for the next 40 years, you're going to have to invest some time in it. You're going to have to make that a priority. You're going to have to show up for her. Because if you don't, she'll last for 15, 20 years maybe till the kids are out of the house, right? Where she's like, oh, it's kind of convenient with the setup. But then, the kids are old enough, they leave the house. Why would she want to stay with you? There's nothing there for her. There is, you sitting there watching Sopranos, drinking your beer, not saying a word, and her longing for this emotional connection. And then she doesn't get that. And then the guy wants to have sex, and she goes like, "That's the last thing I want to do. I'm not like that. I can't just open up to someone I'm not emotionally connected to." And so that's the thing, for us guys to just really understand the basics of that.
I don't I'm thinking here about what tends to happen with strongly career bound people. And people, in my experience, hello kitty, tend to get so focused on the career that they stop developing any other part of themselves. And you can have 2, 5, 10 years go, and you still have that 1968 Camaro that is not restored sitting in your garage that you're going to get to someday. And every time you walk in, it's still sitting there, and it's the old paint and the tires are flat and everything like that. And you're watching kind of your life stay stagnant. And the work becomes the whole focus of the world. And so, what is it that you encourage men to do with regard to personal development and actually moving into having a greater palette of interests in their lives than just simply the work that they're doing?
Well, I love the example you gave of the 1968 Camaro, because it's such a good example for how our marriages are. If you have that 68 Camaro sitting there for 10 years and you're like, oh yeah, I'm gonna get to it. I'm gonna get to the paint. I'm gonna start restoring it. I'm gonna do this thing. But 10 years later, nothing is done on it. That's the exact same expression, right? The moment you can open your mind and you start understanding, if I just spend 30 minutes a day restoring my Camaro, then guess what? After 2, 3 years, you have an amazing car to drive because you have invested the time. You have made it a priority. And so it's the same for the marriage. If you can just commit to 30 minutes a day, consciously and with awareness, to fulfill your wife's needs, to show up for her, to really create connection, to create a safe space, do all those beautiful things which we all did naturally in the first couple of years, guess what happens 3 years later? You have an amazing marriage. And that is a new foundation and a new normal then where you can really build up even more.
For a man who has been not engaging in that way, what do you suggest are the ways for him to start figuring out how to engage with her appropriately for their age, for their interests, and to begin rediscovering one another?
Really, before it comes to the how, right? Because the how is kind of, it's the last step, right?
Mm-hmm.
That I can help you with. But what it really comes down to first is the why. And I know you know that because you work as a coach. When you get someone connected to why they wanna, and back to our example, restore the 68 Camaro, why do you want to do that? Why is that important to you? And when that gets clear, suddenly the how can get figured out, right? You can watch some YouTube videos of how to get the old paint off and just get it done. That's the how. But why do you want to invest this time? Why is that important to you? Why is that important to you to save your marriage? Is it just now that she's saying after 20 years that she's done and she wants a divorce and you feel uncomfortable? Or is it really because you care? Is it really because you want to live with this human being for the rest of your life? And when you get really clear on that, that's when people start moving.
As you're talking, I'm just thinking about another one of the tendencies that men get into. And you talked about the focusing on one thing. I know that I'm guilty of this. I get into a groove, and my groove is an exceedingly effective way of doing my work. Every morning, I have the same thing for breakfast. Every lunch, I've got this specific amount of time. And so life kind of becomes a set of habits, and it becomes very much less interesting to a partner because the man is being exceedingly effective, very successful, really into being accountable and on time and all of these things. Have you noticed that men tend to get into such a habit that they can repeat that habit for 10 years and not realize that they've become exceedingly boring to be married to?
Like that. Um, yeah, I think we're all guilty to it to a certain degree because it works so well, right? When you don't have to think about what you're going to have for breakfast tomorrow because it's the same thing what you had today, that frees up brain power. When you know exactly what time your lunch break is, you don't have to think about it. And so these are powerful tools to get done what we want to get done. The problem becomes when that starts overtaking everything, when that's suddenly the sole focus of your life, where everything is built around, but I need to get things done. That's when we don't know anymore how to have an exciting experience, how to not be that boring guy, how to do something out of the ordinary, which is important to our wives in that moment. And they want to experience something differently because we lost touch with their needs. And that's really one of the first things we start diving in is where have these guys find out what their wives really need? And it blows their mind. I mean, they're like, what? How am I going to find this out? And we go like, you ask her. And he's like, what? I'll just ask. And, then they do it and they come back to me and they say, yeah, hey, she just wants to hang out with me. She wants to go for a nice dinner. Huh. I didn't even think about that. I thought we had good food at home, right? And again, the male psyche is just like, oh, it's just food. But for her, it's the whole getting ready and going out and being out with her husband and the excitement of that. And that's what's important to her, that she has that one-on-one time with him and gets to enjoy that. And for us guys, it's just like, oh, I got food and it was $100.
So where did you grow up, and where did you start getting into all of this?
I grew up in Germany. You might hear that slight German accent. It's sometimes not so easy to place me because of the way I look. But I grew up in Berlin, and I had a great fun childhood. Lots of partying in my teenage years, lots of, very little schooling, lots of going out, being with friends. And then by the time I was 19, 20, I hit a point where I was like, I can't just keep living like this. It was actually interesting experience. By the time I was 15, I think, when I smoked weed the first time, I had this very strong spiritual experience. And I was like, oh my God, I finally found a way to spirituality because
Yeah.
religion wasn't interesting to me. And I was like, oh, great. I just have to smoke more weed. So that wasn't such a smart approach because I ended up being stoned for the next 5 years
Ah.
and nothing happened. Right. So when I found yoga, I started having these same spiritual experiences without being stoned. And that was like, wow, this is really something that works and is much more sustainable.
And did you start doing yoga in Germany, or
I
did
did, yeah.
you? Okay. And then when did you start traveling?
I was 25 when I left Germany and went to India and ended up living there for 20 years. Was never the plan. I was going for 6 months and to kind of just see. And there was this international boarding school from our community where I wanted to help. And so I just got into the process and I ended up staying there for 20 years.
And so when you're in India, I imagine that there are lots of opportunities for learning and going learning new skills of spirituality and meditation and all of these things. Did you have a teacher or a series of teachers that you studied under?
I did have teachers, but probably my biggest teacher was India itself. Because, like you're saying, there was a lot of growth, and there was a lot of growth, but really because I was out of my comfort zone. I was being stretched by the challenges that living in India brought with it. And it was it was challenging every single day. And it was just being in this country and living this lifestyle was probably my biggest teacher.
And so all the way along here, it sounds like you went to India and you had this great spiritual experience and it was easy and you got into yeah, doing coaching and everything like that. What were some of your ups and downs?
I mean, so many ups and downs. I can still remember my first year out of those 20, where I went three times through the process of I got so sick and I was like, I'm moving away from here. I'm leaving tomorrow. It was horrible. And I was ready to give up. But then four times I decided to actually stay. And so that's how I ended up staying. It was always this wave, right? Where when you're really feeling so deconstructed, and I mean some dysentery problems and being sick for a week and it being 110 degrees and you're not having an AC. And I mean, India is really challenging. Plus, you can't just go to a shop and buy some food, which would be comfort food in that moment. You have your rice and your dal and your veggies, and that's it. So it was extremely challenging. And so I was many times ready to just give up and say, okay, this is not for me. But luckily I didn't.
Can you explain, what Kundalini Yoga is and how it's practiced and what the discipline of it actually is?
Well, Kundalini Yoga is quite similar to many of the other forms of yoga, right? It's a practice where you use your physical body to practice certain postures and stimulate the circulation and strengthen your nervous system, go through strengthen your hormonal system. And so just the simple practice of yoga kind of creates a foundation for you to be able to step into a deeper state of meditation.
Okay. All right. And so when did you start working with men? When did you decide that particularly working with men was something that really moved your heart?
Quite recently, because I realized that a lot of my male clients were struggling with a lot of things, but when it really came to the emotional, real hot buttons, it was always about their marriages. And it was always about, we've been together for so many years, we raised kids, we don't even talk to each other anymore. I feel so lonely. I want to leave her. I want to stay together with her. I'm so confused. And so we spend a lot of time around that. And so when I realized that this is really something most of us men in long-term relationships are struggling with, I was like, I need to create something specifically for that niche.
So the state of, I guess, manhood in the West and this isolation, the word loneliness is always brought up when you're talking about men in the West. What brought us to a place where men feel so isolated and men are so prone to unaliving themselves, and men are so prone to depression and feeling like there's no one out there for them?
Yeah. It really starts in our childhood. That moment when we as young boys make that choice to disconnect from aspects of our being. That's the starting point. And that you might get away with it for another 10, 15 years. But then by the time, you're in your midlife area, right, between 35 and 55, that's really when that's just not enough anymore. And now suddenly we want something deeper and we want to connect at a deeper level and we realize we don't have the tools. And that's the biggest challenge.
So as you're teaching men, does it feel to them like they're rediscovering a piece of themselves that they've never known, or that they just have not been doing since maybe their high school or college days when they did have other guys around them?
Yeah. Well, it's a little bit similar to what you spoke about earlier when you tell your male friends, I love you, right? And they don't know where to put that. It's I wouldn't say it's a piece they don't know, because most men know that there is that little soft aspect in themselves. They just don't know how to connect with that. They don't know how to share that with their loved ones. They don't know how to be vulnerable and open up and reconnect with this emotional aspect of their being, which they have suppressed for so many years. That's what they don't know. They know it's there, but they're like, I'm so freaked out. Let's not touch this. Let's talk about something else.
It's so much of this lack of connection is something that has been so tremendously modeled for men by older men. And I see this modeled in so many different ways. There was a forest fire that came through my neighborhood and it destroyed several of the homes. And men that I had known for years, for the very first time, were expressing emotion. And
Mm.
the men were hugging men because people had lost animals, people had lost homes. And there was a real sense of, I didn't know that I meant so much to this other person. I
Mhm.
didn't know that these other people meant so much to each other. And I'm not sure that they knew about that either. But years and years of knowing one another, these people have hung out with each other for long periods of time. Saturday afternoons out here is a time to sit on a porch and just talk about the weather and everything like that. But the connection is something that is was not ever before reinforced to one another until a natural disaster came through and made it all very real.
Yeah, and it's a little bit similar to when the wife comes after 10 years of suffering and says, I want to get a divorce. Now, suddenly, that is enough to wake him up. And that's where those men start saying, like, oh my God, there is something else important. And so, big part of my work is to remind men to not wait till that last moment, to that big explosion, to that forest fire, to finally express how they feel, to finally give a hug to someone they care about, but to learn to do that preemptively and to say, like, maybe there's no big incident, maybe my wife doesn't want to leave me, but I'm noticing that we are missing something, and I want to do something about this now, because those men have a much higher success rate than the ones I talk to who say, hey, my wife left me 6 months ago and she doesn't talk to me or answer any of my texts, but I want her back. And I'm like, sorry, dude, I'm not a magician. That's not a fit, but I could have helped you 5 years ago.
Yeah, I get that a lot with marriage therapy where people have waited for way too long and the brokenness is just too strong. And I also wanted to ask you about society. And we're in a place right now where our society is so tremendously broken and there's such a level of disconnection between people. And these things that you're talking about, the state of manhood and what has occurred, particularly in the last 200 years with the the disconnection that men feel to their community and to their families. What are you seeing as the problems that we can name in our own society that are a result of this men withdrawing into career mode and not really engaging with other things?
Well, I think one of the problems is that our whole life is built around money, right? And built around, oh, who works harder and makes more money is a more successful man. But it's really not like that, right? I mean, you're just the guy who makes more money. This other guy who only works 6 hours a day, but chooses to spend time with his little children and with his wife and focus on other things and lives with less money might just be more successful than you because they actually found a way to create balance in their life. So,
Mm.
so what is true success, right? Is it true success if you're, running a big company and then after 20 years of marriage, your wife leaves you and you don't even know why, right? Where you're like, but I gave her everything. She had this big house, we had 3 cars, blah, 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 right? But that's not what she wanted. Those weren't her needs. So to really understand what how do I want to define success? And success is not just to have a lot of zeros in your bank account. Success is how successful am I spiritually? How successful am I in relationship to my children? How successful am I in my relationships? How successful am I in relationship with myself, with my health, with my well-being? Like those are the real areas of success, right? The money part, that's one of them, but it's not the only one.
What are the daily habits that you would recommend for a man who is looking to turn things around, to reconnect with themselves, to start really building that, I guess, spirituality and emotional intelligence that it is your specialty?
I would say start with prioritizing yourself, your own needs, your connection with yourself. And especially in today's time, this can so easily be understood as, oh my God, that guy is so egocentric. He's just caring about himself. But not your own needs in the outside world, like that you get that new sports car or you're wearing that super expensive Rolex, which you always wanted. But really, what is the need of your body? What is the need of your soul and of your spirit and of your inner connection with yourself? And the most powerful way to do that is, of course, through meditation. But again, something I don't lead with because you scare people away, right? Or you say to someone, oh, all you have to do is meditate every day. They're like, oh, no, no, I'm not going to meditate. So what we do is we do very simple things where we say, okay, can you start with just spending 10 minutes with yourself, sitting outside on the porch, not looking at your phone, just allowing yourself to be with yourself and to really feel what's going on. Maybe go for a walk and not have a podcast in your ear, right? But to really be with yourself and allow yourself to experience that time. Those are the priorities, where I start with helping men develop those important habits. Because if you don't take care of yourself, you can't take care of others. If you don't learn how to take care of yourself, you cannot help and support your wife to encourage her to take an hour out of the day to just be there for herself and take care of herself. Right? And women do something very similar, especially mothers, where they just go into this hyperdrive mode where they're always giving, 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 and always being there for everybody else. And then it's 12 o'clock at night and they haven't eaten, they haven't taken care of themselves, and they just crash and fall into bed, right? And that's non-sustainable either. So this moment of really allowing yourself healthy time with yourself, time for reflection, time for going inwards, time for exploring what your dreams are, what your visions for the future are, what's important to you. Asking yourself these questions of why am I here? Why am I doing all of this? Why is this important to me? That's the starting point.
So, what is the role, and we haven't talked about this yet, of fun in a life? The role of laughter and the role of just frivolous time spent with friends or with self or within a marriage where fun is the focus.
I think it's super important. And it's important for all of us as human beings. For some reason, we think that not being a kid anymore suddenly disconnects us from actually allowing ourselves to have fun. And then we go down that path where we're drinking alcohol just so we can have some fun. But the example I would want to give here is if you have a child that is growing up without any fun in their life, maybe even just for a 1 or 2 year period, I mean, we can all be clear that that child's mental and emotional and physical development will be severely impacted by not allowing for that fun aspect. But then now suddenly we're adults, we're grown-up human beings, and we're like, oh, fun is non-productive, is non-efficient, is not making me money, so I'll just cut it out and I'll work some more. That's the exact same problem. But we're not as sensitive as children, so it doesn't show the effects as quickly as in an 11-year-old who you deprive of fun for even just 3 months. and you'll see huge emotional impact. And so I think it's the same for us as adults.
I think that I'm not particularly unique in this. I am such an information junkie and I can't get enough of it. The podcasts and scrolling and Twitter for the most recent news and all of these different things. And it really is incredibly addicting. And you amass all of this information and admittedly, sometimes no time to process it. I'm just taking it in. And so, do you notice this is another part of where men tend to place their attention? And what are the ramifications of this?
Yeah. I think it's a safe place to go to, and our phones are so available. We got them in our pocket. You can be in that zone in 5 seconds, and you can create the safe space of scrolling, of just reading something, of feeling productive, of having that little dopamine kick from something you like, which makes it so addictive. But at the same time, also disconnects us from ourselves, right? And that allows us to not feel what's really going. And you see that a lot in teenagers in today's time when they're at a social gathering or at a party and they're nervous. First thing they do is they pull their phone out of their pocket and start scrolling because it allows them to feel safe and to feel in that little bubble and that little cocoon of what they can control. And I think it's the same thing for us adults, you know?
And we haven't also talked about this. I live rurally, and there is often a lot of yard work to do, trees to take out, wood to chop, these different things that after a day of doing that, I feel so good about myself. And I feel like I've really accomplished it. And I can stand up on my deck and I can look down and I can see all the wood that I stacked and the tree that I bucked up and all these different things that are just maintenance, just getting my hands dirty. And so what for you is the importance for a man in getting his hands dirty and actually doing work that is kind of beyond going to a nice clean gym, but actually really getting out there and getting dirty?
I think it's super important. And I still have so many fond memories of my childhood because I worked a lot with my father in this way. And I mean, it's just such an exhilarating experience when you know you can do it, right? When you know you could just build that house by yourself. And I mean, it might not go as well, but you have the ability and you can show up and you can get it done. And I think there's just so much value in it. And it's such a beautiful thing. And something so forgotten because we live in a world now where everything, you throw the clothes in the washing machine, they come out clean. I mean, it's really not that much to do anymore, right? In that way, where you do really need to get your hands dirty.
What are your own daily spiritual practices?
I like to wake up early. And so that starts for me with the night before to go to bed early. Because if I go to bed much later than 10 o'clock, that starts impacting my wake up time. And so I like to wake up at 5:30 in the morning. I like to take a cold shower, like that recently such big hype with Wim Hof's ice bath and this kind of stuff. But the yoga's been doing cold baths in the mornings for thousands of years. So it's something, which really allows me to find my way into my body much quicker than a big cup of coffee. And then I will sit for about an hour and a half, and do my meditations and just allow myself this time between 5 and 7 a.m. when the family starts getting up to just be for myself. And that's reflection time, that's going deep inwards, that's really connecting with my core essence. And so for me, that is extremely important.
So, one of the things that has really changed my own life and reset a lot of my spiritual path is psychedelic medicine and plant-based medicine. And you'd said that something that at least made you first start awakening was marijuana and so forth. And so I wanted to ask you about, we're heading into this psychedelic renaissance and this revisiting of an ancient spiritual practice and so forth. And so, with regard to psychedelics, what are your thoughts on these things, and what are you familiar with?
I think it's an amazing tool that we have because from my experience, I took such a deep dive into meditation and meditative practices that, now that I'm experimenting more and more with psychedelics, I see the similarities. And it really is just a way to allow the body to access these deep, spiritually connected states that are naturally already in us through this shortcut of the psychedelic, and to really create a memory of what is possible. My opinion around psychedelics is really that I think it's an amazing tool to give us an experience, give us a remembrance of what's possible, and then to allow ourselves to practice reaching those states without the psychedelics, or maybe just with a microdose of the psychedelics, and to really be like, oh my God, I'm that already. What the mushrooms brought out, what the ayahuasca brought out, whatever you did. But this remembrance of this is not the psychedelic creating something inside of me, which is not me, but this is the psychedelic opening up something which has been there all along.
So I got a million thoughts going through my head about this because I'm so passionate about this particular topic. And there has been this debate as to whether or not psychedelics are too much of a shortcut into a spiritual realm. However, like my personal view of it is that it can be such a profound awakening for somebody who has spent their life not observant of the different dimensions that are around them, and it can set a course for spiritual exploration. And so, you've been doing your own kind of spiritual awakening, did psychedelics play a role in helping you access deeper realms of yourself?
For me, it was a little different because I was in India. In India, psychedelics are not a big thing. And so I had my spiritual awakening experience without psychedelics, right? I had that first experience with the marijuana, but then I realized that there was so many side effects when I smoked it all day. And then when I really went deep in meditation, and I'm talking like, 8 or 10 hours of meditation a day over an extended period of time, that's when I access these deep realms which I now, that I'm experimenting with mushrooms or with other psychedelics, I say like, oh my God, this is just like meditating for 12 hours.
Yeah, it is something that has helped me really grasp my own ability to access deeper and deeper pieces of things, because I've got the whole ADHD thing going on. And so I've always got a hamster wheel just going a million miles an hour in my own brain. And so being able to access that and go, okay, that's what I can focus on. That's where I can go to help myself go deeper. For me, it was a great stepping stepping stone into a world of healing, a world of meditation, and a world of spiritual nourishing for myself.
Yeah.
And so, do you see a lot of people around you that are growing through the use of psychedelics?
Oh, yeah, of course. Especially when it's used in this very conscious way around healing and processing. versus, oh, let's go to a party and smoke some joints and take some mushrooms and drink beer on top of that. And I don't know why I'm feeling so weird, right? So I think you need to separate those two things from each other, right? There's one way of taking it recreational to just go and let loose and go dance, whatever. That's one thing. But to really take it in this ritualistic way, how our ancestors have done it for thousands of years, and really to say, I allow myself a full 12 hours, a full 24 hours to experience and be conscious with myself and to give myself space and be in nature and meditate and talk and reflect. I mean, that's powerful stuff.
What would you like to see for the future of humanity, the future of consciousness for men in in the world? What would you see as something that would, something that is the individual discovering things about themselves that make for a better world?
I would love to see more kindness. I think one of the biggest things we struggle with as a society is a lack of kindness and connection and closeness and compassion, where you can just say, I see this other person, I might not agree with what they're doing, but I can see that good in them. I can see the light in them. I can see their their struggles and their suffering. And this openness of the heart where you can really see the reflection of God in every other human being. And my teacher always used to have this saying where he said, if you can't see God in all, you can't see God at all. And it always stuck with me, where I was like, wow, there is that aspect of totality of the universe, the creator, whatever you want to call it, in every human being. And it's on us to find that and connect with that and honor that. And if we all just do a little bit more of that, I think our whole world would be a much better place to live in.
Hmm. What are some of the more damaging ideas that you see that are very pervasive right now in our society? So these things that tend to create a greater sense of loneliness, isolation, and lack of personal nourishment for men.
I think separation is the biggest one, because every time when we believe we are different from someone else, or we have the better answers, or we have the better path, that was one of the struggles I had with the religious approach. Even though in Sikhism it's very different than in Christianity. I grew up Christian, as as it's much more inclusive and in a positive way in many ways. But it's still this separation. It's still this, oh, I'm doing the right thing and you're doing the wrong thing. I think this is one of the challenges so many people on a spiritual path are struggling with. And when it comes to this point of the spiritual ego, right, where you're saying, "Ooh, I meditate every day. I got a beard. I have a turban. I must be much higher up on the spiritual rung than you because you only meditate 5 minutes, and you this, right? This separation, I think it's the biggest problem we have. And so I find that when you're truly finding that connection with people, where you're saying we all might be on different levels of the path, what we all have that light inside of us. We're all one, we're all connected at that same point. We all have that same potential built inside of us. That level of compassion and love and acceptance, I think it's really the most important thing.
And what's the future for you? Where do you want to go? And what are you up to where you want to keep developing into?
I want to be able to serve more people. I want to be able to touch and impact more lives in a positive way. And that's really been my motivation to get uncomfortable and do new things and, be on podcasts and do Instagram reels and do all these kinds of things where my tendency would be like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have to do that. I can just sit here at home. It's all good. But I'm challenging myself to step into this discomfort, into this growth, because I know it will allow me to impact one more person's life, and then 10 more people's lives, and then 100 more people's lives. And that's what's for me like the most important thing.
I want to thank you, and I want to thank you by telling you how valuable I think you are. There are so many ways in which men feel such a lack of something and they don't know what it is. And there's so much loneliness, there's so much of a sense of not knowing where to go. I watched this terrible video in the last 24 hours of this Marine who had been was at the side of the road, and he was about to kill himself, and a police officer stopped and checked in on him, and he's standing in front of his truck and just crying because he just wanted a hug from this police officer. And he had obviously been a deployed serviceman and everything. And there is an absolute epidemic of loneliness, an epidemic of self-denial, an epidemic of depression and anxiety, with this John Wayne notion that all you have to do is just be stronger and that you'll get through it, that somehow your just greater sense of moral superiority and your great pecs are going to get you through the next challenges in your life. And you realize that sometimes that stuff gets you through college football, but it doesn't really get you through when life starts to get much more complex when you're in your 30s, 40s, and 50s. And so your ability to help men understand the depths of themselves and the importance of these relationships, and to self-discover their own joy, the importance of their own spirit, and the and to discover their connection again with their partners. It's such an important thing, and honestly, there needs to be 20,000 of you. And so I thank you for the wonderful work that you're doing in the world, because you really are spreading the love and the cheer and the connection that so many men are lacking in our society. So just thank you for the hard work that you're doing.
Oh, thank you for saying that. That means a lot.
Please don't forget to like and subscribe to the Mindful Mutiny podcast. It really helps with growing things and us being able to bring wonderful conversations like this to you. In a lifetime, there are more decisions than anybody can count. Living the highest form of yourself is the most rewarding thing that you can do. Make incredible, positive, risky, and bold decisions to be the highest version of you. Now go be something great.